All right, welcome back to Storytime. We're actually in the fourth book now. So this one's called Transformation in the Desert of Darkness. Fourth book in my Light of the Infinite series. And we're beginning with midbar. So this is the first in this fourth book of the Torah. And sometimes I start my paragraphs or my chapters before I jump into all the paragraphs with a poem, And so I'm going to start with this poem that's in this chapter. Amazing how a day dreams from night through might. Light brings darkness dependent on its contrast. First love, last to last, but closer to you, being the only answer to a question you've only been guessing. Inward lies the truth. So this week we are nearing the end of Sfirat Omer. So it's this time, this counting from Passover, from Pesach to Shavuot, which we're coming upon right now. And I'm actually going to be in Israel at the Kotel, the Western Wall in Jerusalem for it, which I'm so excited about. Next week, I leave on Sunday. So this counting is between Pesach, Passover, Shavuot, as we mentioned. And it's meant to prepare us to receive the living Torah on Shavuot. It's this idea of like getting a new Torah and how we connect, if the world is always recreated, and how we connect to this sort of revelation, this divine energy. It's our ascendance to what the Kabbalah calls the 50th gate, the gate of understanding of Binah. As we ascend, we are finding that we all have this Nefesh Elokit, this part of God. So the truth lies within each of us. We just need to transcend the layers of doubt and unlock the powerful truth and redemption that awaits, right? So the idea that Rabbi Nachman talks about in Breslov, which is written over and over on my jacket, is this good point that we have, that each person has, that within all of us, and we can, if we focus on that good point, then we can always let that color how we view that other person. It's like this judging favorably. But that good point is also this godly point, right? So, and it's all these layers and all these things that are concealing it, this idea of klipa, this sort of shell, or these layers that are concealing the godliness, or like the actual truth. So the idea is to remove these layers, these klipot, and then we find that good point, that nikudat tova, which is also the godly point. And this is the Nefesh Elokit that's talked about in the Tanya with the Alter Rebbe. And he says, mamash, so that you understand that literal, this isn't just like a cute thought. This is literally the truth. This is what gives our body its life, really. So it's the things in this world that are concealed that are the real parts, and the things that are revealed are sort of this imaginary thing that makes up this physical world that we're in. And so we're not able to see the things that are below that, just as Melech HaOlam, the king of the universe, is Ne'elam, is hidden within the universe. So these are all of the things that are connected to spirituality, to the truth, to the light, all of the things that get covered. And when we say the light can dispel the darkness, it's because this darkness is this imagination, and it can be removed. It's this koach hamedame, it's as doubt and safek and all these things that are clouding this judgment and are covering and concealing the light, which is the truth, which is Hashem. So we need to transcend these layers. And for those of us that just joined, we're in the fourth book of the Torah, midbar, and this is Transformation in the Desert of Darkness, my fourth book in the Light of the Infinite series. So all this begins with Pesach, which in the Kutei Halachot, Rab Natan of Breslov explains as Pesach, which is this talking mouth, with Rab Nachman Rabbeinu teaches. This means that the only way to reach these upper levels of holiness is through speech, which when we're thinking about that, we're using the word tefillah also, which is prayer. So it's this idea of, King David talks about it in Tehillim, of like waking up, this tikkun chatzot, and all these different things where the darkness, where you're seeing darkness, right? So you're looking around, and that's also representing this time of night where there is darkness, but you're getting pulled in this direction, sometimes toward this lust or this or whatever. And the idea is to wake up from that spiritual slumber and call out with this open mouth, call out to God, which is how we look at tefillah of prayer, the true speech of calling out to Hashem, of God. The blessings you receive correlate to the words that you speak. This is the power of counting out loud with the blessing of Sfirat Omer. So the idea is we're moving through this time to mitaken, to rectify all these emotional attributes. So when we're thinking about the tree of life of the Sfirot, so the bottom 7, going from Chesed down to Malchut, so these are the 7 emotional attributes. And these parallel the days that we're at, the 7 days of the week, which is nature, which is how we're trying to move spiritually through nature to rise above nature, but in a spiritual sense. And 8 with circumcision or the Mishkan, when you're looking at 7 and then 8, or 7 times 7, which is the 7 Shabbatot. So now we have the 49 days of Sfirat Omer, and then the 8th is represented by the 50th. So it's 49 is representing 7 because you're multiplying it. And then the 50th is this place that is Kulo Tov, Kulo Shabbat. It's connected to the redemptive state, where everything below that is within nature, which is represented by the 7 days of the week and the 7 emotional attributes. And then when you go beyond that, going beyond time and going to the spiritual, beyond anything that is, as we're viewing it, as good and bad, the Arizal says, I think there's no thing that it doesn't have a little bit of that or a little bit of that. So there's this separation, which when we start the Torah, it starts with the Bet, Breshit, this idea of two, of this dichotomy of, as Melech Shlomo, King Solomon says, Zelu Madzeh, everything has its opposite, right? So it's these potentials and it's this way that we can move through life and have this freedom of choice, right? So the idea is when we move to the 50th, to the gate, the 50th gate of wisdom in Kabbalah, then we're in this space that is beyond nature and is beyond time and is beyond the finite and the physical, and it's jumping into the light of the infinite, right? So that's the time that we're moving in, and these 49 days of Sfirat Omer is preparing us for this time, this redemptive state. It's moving from that constrictive consciousness, and that's why it correlates to the emotions and these emotional attributes that we're trying to move through and rectify every element within each one. So it's not just 7, it's actually 7 times 7. So we can rectify every element within each one because all of them exist within the other. So that's the idea. And when we're able to do that, when you're reading the bracha, it says 7 Shabbatot Mimot. So it's these 7 Sabbaths, these pure, these beautiful. Rabbi Nachman talks about Torah Tmimah and Tmimut, bringing this sort of purity and this pure essence toward the Torah and toward everything that you're doing. So you're trying to perfect all those things. And the idea is this hitaruta levatata, which is this sort of arousal from below, the work that we could do within this reality, in this finite space. And then we receive this Shekhinah, this indwelling of the divine feminine, which is the hitaruta de le'ela. So it's coming as a, sort of a response, as this mirror. And in Tanya, the Alter Rebbe talks about it as, you know, when you're looking at the water, so the water is showing you the exact, it's reflecting like a face to face in the water. It's reflecting exactly what it's being shown. So it's this idea of this mirroring that we're trying to bring in. So the opening verse, the Parasha, V'yidaber Hashem el Moshe b'midbar, and God spoke to Moshe in the desert. The word midbar and dibur, speech, as we're talking about before, the blessings you receive correlate with the words that you speak, share the same root. So midbar, desert, and dibur, speech. Speech represents freedom. The desert landscape is a metaphor for freedom, right? Because it's a place where the Shekhinah, the indwelling of the divine feminine that we're talking about, the divine presence, is shown most clearly to Moshe at the burning bush and at Mount Sinai, and to the children of Israel in the Ananei Kavod, the clouds of glory. The desert is a place without distraction where humility lives. It's a place where the dance with divine consciousness paves the path to unification. This week we start the 4th book of the Torah, midbar, which means in the wilderness or in the desert, and covers the continuous journey of the Jews in the desert after the revelation at Sinai. In English, though, it's called Numbers. While we count the days leading up to receiving the Torah, we learn that Moshe and Aaron are instructed to count the Jewish people in the Sinai desert, and so the book is known simply as Numbers. At this point in the narrative, there have already been 2 censuses taken, but this one's different. The census is taken of the 12 tribes of Israel. Moshe counts 603,550 men between the ages of 20 and 6 years old, while the tribe of Levi are counted separately and number 22,300 males age 1 month and older. So this pasuk, this verse says, count the heads of the entire assembly of the children of Israel. Rashi, the foremost commentator, explains this powerful verse as Hashem, God, choosing to count the Jews to demonstrate his love for them. But with everything in this world, there's a balance, the potential for good and the potential for bad, right? So the verse is translated as count the heads, but literally it means raise the heads. This fits nicely with Rashi's interpretation because the count is meant to elevate the Jewish people and ascribe greatness to them. The other end of this, though, is where the Midrash comes in, pointing out that the same word can also mean remove the heads, which we have seen previously in Bereshit, in Genesis, where Pharaoh will remove your head from you and hang you on a tree. So it's the same Hebrew word. And when we have a Hebrew word, when it appears, we're always looking at it. It's almost like when a lawyer is going through a contract. What's the context that this was used previously? What does that mean? Like, what can we infer from how it was used previously? And then you can try to say, okay, but that's how we gave context to this. You previously used it like this. So we could say that we can interpret it in this way, and that could either help or hurt. So the same thing, even more so, of course, is with the Torah. When you see any word, so then you have to look at how was it previously brought in, and what are the sort of ramifications, and how do we bring out just any sort of light from this, but also what does it mean? And sometimes there is this sort of like hitacha, like, okay, so here in this instance, previously it was brought in a bad way, and this could be the hitacha, the transforming it or bringing it into a good light. So we're it's like basically tikkun, it's like the rectification of that previous thing. But in other senses, at least halachically, so then we're like, okay, what's the ramifications halachically in the Jewish law that would be brought in here? Because then we have sort of a context of how it was used previously and then what that actually means in this instance. So here Pharaoh was using it in the opposite, right? So we were meant to learn from here that the men counted in this census were originally destined to die in the desert as a punishment for the sins of the spies. But instead, there's this tikkun of that descent. There was an ascent, and Hashem counted his precious children. So there's this darkness and disconnect used in this previous time that it was to basically raise their heads, the vosh. And here, this is the tikkun, because instead of dying, they're being raised, and we're bringing blessings and goodness just in time. And yeah, I love you guys. I'm seeing the comments. Thanks for tuning in, and love that you love it. So we read, as Hashem, God commanded Moshe, Moses, he counted them, right? So one might think that Moshe had counted the men, as one would to determine its military strength. There's some other strategic purpose when you're counting. But it's clear that he did not do this of his own accord, only because God had requested that he do so. Other people would take a census in order to be prepared for what battle may come, But this does not apply to the Jewish people who have emunah, who have faith in Hashem and God to protect them regardless of the size of their army. As we've seen also in modern day in Israel, it made no sense that Israel would win all of these wars against all the surrounding countries that would want their elimination, that unfortunately some of them still do. But we have God, and that's something that oftentimes is forgotten when people talk about, the military strength in Israel and all these different things. It's like, Iran shot down these 500 plus, rockets or whatever. And yeah, Israel's incredible, thank God. And we're brilliant at all of these things, tech and just this strategic part of it and all of these different things. But it makes no sense. It's the size of New Jersey, and we have all these countries, powerful countries, trying to, from the river to the sea, destroy and eliminate Israel, the Jewish people. So that's God, and that we're protected, and these rockets aren't coming down. And, obviously there's things that happen, but for the most part, we're protected. And sometimes bad things happen as a wake-up call. So we have to keep remembering to be in that space of love and light and being in sort of this alignment instead of disconnect. And a lot of that is seen when we come and unify, and it's in the Torah. If you follow these mitzvot, these commandments, then you are blessed. This was last week. And if you don't, then you are cursed. So we have to stay in this space of full emunah, and that's faith, right? And when we're not in that, when we're in the absence of that, then we're in this space of fear. And that is when we the law of attraction, when we're in that and we're lacking faith, then we're bringing in these other sort of dark things, right? But when we're in the space of faith and trusting that everything's going to be for the good and having full trust in Hashem, as we read last week, then we're able to bring in those things because God says, then you will be blessed. And Hashem writes in with the rain in their season. So rain representing these blessings, this shefa coming down. And the idea is that it means that it's already there. The blessing's already there. The rain's already there. The shefa is already waiting. We just have to align with it so that we can receive it. So counting them, so to protect them the size of the army, that we're believing that Hashem is protecting them, and being in alignment with that, as we've seen time and again throughout the wars waged against the children of Israel, both back then and now. So counting them had no other purpose but elevation and appreciation, much like we would anything precious to us, like jewels. Some argue that the counting was determined, or would determine the number of people in each tribe in order to divide the land of Israel in a fair manner. They say that the sins of the spies had not yet happened when the count took place, so it must have been intended for fair division of the land. But of course, Hashem knew that the sin would happen and that the generation would not enter the land of Israel. Knowing that they would sin and die in the desert, their heads would be removed, as the other context of this through Pharaoh using that word. Hashem chose to elevate and raise their heads anyway. After all, they and their children are still the collective children of Israel, the chosen people saved from exile in Egypt, brought through the desert and given the promised land, Israel. When a person is being counted, they can look at it as if they themselves are so precious that they're being treasured, or they could think that they don't matter much as an individual. What they do doesn't matter because they're only being counted as part of a group, insignificant in comparison to the whole. Malbim's Eretz Chemda explains that each person is always both an individual and a part of a whole. Each and every one of us is a complete world, a microcosm of a whole. And we also share in the whole like the stars to which we are compared. The stars taken all together are one unit, but each star is a world unto itself, as it says in Yeshayahu, who brings forth their army in number and calls to all of them by name. The Lubavitcher Rebbe elaborates on Rashi's point that the counting was done to show Hashem's love for us, saying that God, Hashem's focus, has to have been on the part of us that is equal, which is our essence, our Jewish soul, and our godly soul that we all have. The point of the census was to bring the soul to awareness. So the Rebbe also explains the difference between this third census and the first two. The first was when Moses counted the Israelites when they went out of Egypt, identifying each person who had made the courageous self-sacrifice, following the word of Hashem into the wilderness, right? So Moses again counted the Israelites when the Mishkan, when the tabernacle was built. The count and construction was done through Beka, which was the half shekel donation, which touched on both the intellect and emotion of the Israelites as they prepared for the work that would bring the Shekhinah down, this indwelling of the divine feminine that we were talking about. The Infinite One commanded them, and the Israelites followed. This third count was different, though, because Moses and Aaron both counted, and the Israelites, by their own emotion and action in the service of the Mishkan, brought Hashem into their midst. They created a union of their individual and collective Jewish souls with God. As we read earlier, or as we read, take from among you an offering for Hashem. Whoever is generous of heart shall bring the offering to Hashem to contribute to the building of the Mishkan. So this is what we were talking about earlier, the good point and that godly point. The idea is with this Mishkan, it wasn't that, okay, every single person is commanded and has to give this mandatory giving. It was actually whoever is generous of heart, which means that you had to look within the good point within yourself and with a full heart give. So that means that this Mishkan, this sacred sanctuary, this tabernacle is actually a manifestation and a representation of all the good points. And this is something that Rabbi Nachman talks about all the time. So this is, and the Lubavitcher Rebbe says that when Hashem's writing Shechanti B'tocham, so it's saying, even though it's one Mishkan, but plural is saying that I will dwell amongst them, it's saying that we all have this sacred sanctuary, this Mishkan within ourselves, and God is saying that he's going to dwell amongst all of them, because this good point, this godly point within ourselves is actually literally God. So all of us have that godliness within ourselves. In Judaism, heart and action are intertwined. So every wise-hearted man among you shall come and creates excitation from below. We were talking about the hitarutu dilatata, through generously drawn forth from above. This emotional and physical contribution creates a reciprocal relationship between God and humankind, and this is how Hashem's glory filled the Mishkan. So this, the hitarutu dilatela. In an oft-quoted Mishnah from Mishnah Sanhedrin, it's written, every human being is unique, and every human being is a copy of the prototype human being, Adam. Therefore, every human being must say, for my sake, the world was created. In Judaism, we believe that every being was created in the image and likeness of God. And from the same Mishnah, Chazal, our sages teach that every life is like an entire universe. It's when our own soul enters our body that it becomes true. So it's this Nefesh Elokit that the Alter Rebbe talks about. A body without a soul is similar to any other. But when the awareness of the soul as part of the body is recognized by an individual, he or she can begin to live out their purpose. Their potential to be an infinite universe becomes apparent, right? So once the soul leaves the body, and unfortunately, I literally saw this with my mom when she passed, I saw the soul leaving the body, and it's insane. So what the Lubavitcher was talking about is that it's the soul that enlivens the body, but without the soul, it's dust and earth. It goes back to the earth, right? So a body without a soul is similar to any other. And we need this soul to begin to live out our purpose. Their potential to be an entire universe becomes apparent. So to use the body, the finite, to spiritualize reality and to fulfill the light of the infinite, this Hashem's will, that's when the body is a vessel for the soul. That realization can take a person from a physical and spiritual desert, midbar, that we were talking about before, to a spiritual and physical promised land, Israel. So when we're talking about Israel, we're talking about the promised land. So it's both this physical space, but it's also this spiritual space, that this redemptive state, this promised land within ourselves. And when we're talking about Mitzrayim, we're talking about the Mitzah, this constricted consciousness, and we're trying to always continuously leave Egypt and move toward the promised land, toward Israel within ourselves as well. So just as a verse can be interpreted as a descent or an ascent, and a head looking down or being lifted up, whether it's initially when Pharaoh is bringing it, using that word, or now with Hashem and Moshe in the Torah using that word. So looking down or looking up, so too it's true for the individual being counted, how they walk away from that feeling insignificant because it's just one part of an entire group, or feeling like, oh wow, I'm included within this group, and that could be something that's uplifting and motivating. The Mishnah comes to teach the importance of each individual, so much so that each person is their own universe. The Torah describes the Jewish people as ish echad belev echad, so one person with one heart. So even if we are being counted individually, we can't view ourselves as separate entities. Each individual is essential to the wholeness of the collective. Just as a body is made up of countless elements that work in concert, so too are we as a people made up of individuals that contribute to the whole of the nation. Because of this, in truth, if we could be on the level of feeling in such a way, when one of us is hurting, we are all hurting. Just as when one part of our body hurts, the entire body is affected. We can only be shalem, which means whole or complete, when we are all redeemed, when none of us are hurting. Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, required 600,000 Jews to be present. Rashi goes so far as to say that even if one person was missing, even the least significant from the tribe of Dan, Hashem would not have given the Torah. We see this with the Torah itself. Even if one letter in a Torah scroll is written incorrectly, missing or incomplete in any way, the entire Torah is rendered invalid. Humility is important. Moshe was said to be the most humble person in the world, but that humility wasn't a false sense of insignificance. He spoke to Hashem. He led the Jewish people. He knew how powerful he was, but he was humble because he believed that if someone else had been given the same talent, the same task, they might have done a better job than him. The Baal Shem Tov taught that humility in the wrong place will cause you to block your own and others' blessings. If one thinks, who am I to do this good deed? What difference would it make? Who am I to pray for my friend? I'm insignificant. That person is blocking the blessings and goodness that can come to them and through them. However, humility in the right place brings abundant blessings. Picture a rich person who invites everyone to their parties, but spends the entire time talking about how rich and incredible they are. Everyone will leave being jealous and having ill feelings toward them, directing negative thoughts and potentially negative actions toward them. Now picture that same person opening up their home, offering all that they can in a humble, loving, and giving way. Everyone will leave feeling positive and thankful that such an individual was blessed with such treasures because they're using them in a way to give to others. The guests will not only feel uplifted and inspired, but with feelings of hope that this person can continue to do good and provide in such a way. To further this point, Rabbi Nachman told a colleague, Rabbi Yudel, that praying for a friend keeps a person from arrogance. Rabbi Yudel questioned the statement by pointing out that it would seem that one would become more arrogant by praying for a friend, because the implication is that the person praying is more important to God than the friend. The Rebbe Rabbeinu answered him with a story. There was a king who was angry with his son and sent him away. Afterwards, the prince placated his father, who agreed to have him back. The same thing happened several times until, at last, the king was so angry that not only did he send his son away, but he also told one of his ministers that if the prince were to come along wanting to placate him, the minister should not allow him to enter. The minister obeyed, but he saw how much the prince was suffering because he could not get to his father and to placate him. The minister realized that the king was also suffering, and he said to himself, "Surely I am the cause of this, since I am the barrier between them. I myself would go to the king and beg him to forgive the prince and allow him back." The minister did so, and the king immediately agreed. The meaning of the story is obvious. Whenever a friend of ours is suffering, physically or spiritually, we should say, without a doubt, my sins are the cause of all this. The Holy One constantly desires to bestow blessings of goodness upon his children, but my sins are a barrier holding all this back. So the solution is for me to plead with the king on behalf of my friend. When a person thinks like this, they will certainly not become arrogant. The root of arrogance is when a person prides themselves on having qualities that their friends lack. But when a person believes that the only cause of their friend's deficiency, spiritual or material, is the screen they themselves have erected between their friend and the Holy One, who want to bestow blessings at all times, they will certainly not become arrogant. On the contrary, their pride will be broken and they will come to genuine humility. My dad was a chaplain in the Navy and a rabbi in the Navy, and he traveled all over. On occasion, he would bump into Rabbi Shlomo Karlbach. Rabbi Shlomo would tell him about the word shalom. He said, how can someone say shalom when you first meet someone, and the same word when you say goodbye? Shalom comes from shalem, completeness. I was incomplete until I met you, but now that I met you, I am more complete than before. So there's this shalom, this shalem. But now that you are leaving, you are taking something away from me. And I say shalom in the hopes that someday you will come back and make me complete again. We are all made in the divine image, and with each positive interaction, we see another piece of Hashem and feel more complete. The first census coincides with Pesach, with Passover, a time when revelation comes from above. Hashem's make their way. All right. Put like a thumbs up or whatever. Let me know that you can hear me, because sometimes it cuts out audio afterwards. So Hashem's love and mercy toward us is shown, but not by our own action or merit. After this period comes the Omer, this time that we're counting, this Filat Omer, a time of sacrifice, a time the Lubavitcher Rebbe calls the revelation that comes from below. When through divine grace, our own merit brings forth the Torah that will be revealed on Shavuot. So receiving this Torah anew. The third census involved not just Moshe, but Aaron too. Whereas Moshe is Hashem's channel for revelation from above, Aaron, the priest, elevates Israel from below. It is through this census that the Jews became aware not only of the blessings from above, but of the potential to unify with the infinite one from below. And that is what prepares us for Shavuot and to receive this Torah anew. In this time of counting, we realize that each day is a new beginning, a new opportunity to dance with the divine. So this is all from my fourth book, Transformation in the Desert of Darkness, from my book series, Light of the Infinite. Love you guys. See you in Israel next week for Shavuot. I'm going fully to the Promised Land, both physically and spiritually, God willing. And love you guys. See you soon.